Hi there, this is Philip from Beyond the Tabletop, and in this video I'm talking about the Warhammer New Year's reveals, specifically for 40k. Now I'm just going to preface that this video is taken from the Lookout Sir podcast, which I also do, and I'm just giving you a much shorter version here. You can head over to the Lookout Sir channel if you want to watch the whole 2 hour plus long podcast. With that all said, enjoy the show. So in this section, we are talking about the Red Corsairs, the other kind of piratical Corsairs, the Elder Corsairs that we're going to cover slightly later on. So this is Huron Blackheart, who was first previewed in the Christmas Day reveals. So we saw him, and then we were teased with the other members of his entourage. So we're going to go through him and the other miniatures that they've previewed for the Red Corsairs. I'm really excited about the Red Corsairs. I've always had a bit of a love affair with the idea of the Red Corsairs, of collecting them, of having renegade space marines. They're basically so much more exciting than regular chaos corrupted space marines. The idea that people have just defected from the Imperium and for other reasons, whatever they might be, and they're maybe not chaos aligned, or they're slightly chaos tainted. In the case of the Red Corsairs, they're undivided. So they haven't aligned themselves with any one particular god. So their chaos taint isn't quite as noticeable as some of the more traditional chaos factions. These guys look very good, I'm going to say, off the bat. And again, talking about my love of them, I was a big reader of the Badab War. I collect Minotaurs as one of my Space Marine, or currently only Space Marine chapter, but these are very compelling models. The concept of having Red Corsairs. Yeah, Huron Blackheart's always been one of my favorite characters, at least in terms of the Chaos range. This is a real glow up. So we're going to have a look through the models. If you're listening along, you can actually follow us on YouTube, where we're going to have a video version of it, so you can see the models themselves. Here's the initial picture, which is showing you Huron and the entire Comrade collection that he has. There are 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 extra miniatures in addition to Huron himself. And there's an interesting mix of Badab War stalwarts. So we've got Garyon the Corpse Master, who's the Lord Apothecary, and he was in the Astral Claws. We've got Qatar Garrix, who's the headsman and formerly of the Executioners, which feels quite fitting. And then we've got Garlon Soul Eater, who's a sorcerer and was part of the Mantis Warriors. They all fled with him into the Maelstrom at the end of the Badab War. Huron himself, which is also from the Astral Claws. So a nice motley crew to go alongside with him. These are going to, I guess, be like a kind of command squad retinue, very similar to Titus and the models that he came with. So let's look at each one individually. Let's start off with Huron, who is a phenomenal mini, though there's the caveat that a lot of people don't like his face. And I sort of understand it. It's very different from what he had before. He's been depicted in artwork, and quite recent artwork as well. And he just has much more of like a classic, generic, bald head. Yes, half of his face is missing, but it's got this just classic Space Marine stoic look to it, which I kind of liked. I liked that original look to him. This one is a little bit jarring. It is actually very similar to Felstius, I think his name is. So if we look here, the Lord of Contagion, Lord Felfius and the Tainted Cohort, which is now generic Blight Lord, Lord of Contagion. He's got a very smiley, happy-go-lucky face. It, I think, was quite widely derided, but it has grown on me over time. So there's a lot of similarities there with Huron. Huron with his giant smile, really jarring initially, but actually in the few weeks since he's been out and previewed, I kind of like it. He's basically much more characterful now. He's a very distinct visual face, and not a by the numbers generic Space Marine. It would actually be really interesting to compare the head to the original Forge World mini that he had. So we've got the image of Huron, Luft Huron as he was called, from the old Forge World website as it once was. And you can see here that this head doesn't really look like the new one particularly. Again, it's just a by the numbers generic Space Marine. He could be anyone. He has a bit of hair. He has a tiny mouth in comparison to what he now has at the very least. The model's gorgeous though, but he's a sort of very nondescript Space Marine. So the new one has a lot more character, and I don't mind that. That's not a problem. One of my favorite things about the Red Corsairs as well, in relation to like the armor, is that they were always much more less chaosified. Yeah, they've got some spikes and they've got some embellishments and they've got the trim, but it's way more understated than most Chaos Legionnaires and Chaos Marines. And Huron's probably one of the more chaosified looking minis, but I think it's relatively toned down in comparison to a lot of the Chaos Lords that you do get. The old sort of wrestler style belts, which I'm normally not a huge fan of, but it is sort of iconically Chaos and Space Wolf. So he's got that. You know, Abaddon's got it as well. He is very much like a mini Abaddon. I can see that. The little critter, I was a bit on the fence about when I first saw it, but then, you know, it is part of his old model and artwork and lore. So it makes sense. And actually having it as part of the miniature and not a separate mini is really good. It basically makes it much more of a little diorama. His axe is cool. His sort of iron halo that he's got around him, which is sort of like a trophy rack, that looks really good. You can see the backpack is clearly a bit of a nod to old style armor as well. So overall, I would say a good mini. A little bit jarring with the head, but I think that's grown on me. Hopefully it will grow on you guys as well. And worst case scenario, there are plenty of other heads out there that have half the face missing that you could just do a head swap for. And size-wise, you would hope would at least be compatible and not too out of place. What you don't want to do is put a head on that's just too small. So that is Huron. Let's look at the next guy, which is Garyon the Corpse Master. And again, what strikes me about this is he looks mostly like a standard Marine. He is not chaos in any way. Yes, there's a tiny bit of like kind of classic chaos trim on his legs, but for the most part, like the top half, he just looks like a Space Marine in an older mark of armor, which is really cool. I love his little claws that are coming out of his backpack. They're not quite mechanendrites, but like little servo arms, and how one of them has a little servo skull on it. That is very cool. And just the general sense of what he's going on here. Although actually noticing that he does have a mechanendrite arm coming round his left-hand side, the right-hand side of the image, literally about to claw the nearly dearly departed Red Corsair mini that he stood on. It's not a tactical rock, it's a tactical corpse who's struggling to still survive. And then the rules that they explained in the live stream is that I think he gains a CP when there's a unit within half strength nearby him, basically, because he's clearly harvesting the gene seed. And that really ties in with the general vibe of the Red Corsairs and when they were at the Astral Claws and the whole Badab War. The whole Badab War was Huron not wanting to pay the gene seed tithe to the Imperium because he thought they weren't doing a good job protecting the realm around the Maelstrom. And he thought he could do a better job. So he's like, I'm withholding it until I get support, at least from what I remember. So yeah, he's very cool. Next up is Gatar Garrix, again in sort of nice old style Mark armor. He's got a sort of skull helm, which gives him a slight chaplain vibe. And obviously the chaplains, at least in the Primaris, have the Judicia, who is like an executioner. So I don't know if that's like a deliberate synergy to have their own Chaos version. But that is quite interesting. And then obviously Chaos have their own Executioner Mini as well, which is separate from this. But I guess this is maybe the Red Corsairs specific Executioner Mini. Covered in trophies, which is a little over the top, but it's very cool. Again, armor looks very Space Marine, not very chaosified. I think my one criticism of this model, maybe it's one of the eye sockets seems to be missing an eye, which is a bit jarring to look at, but does make it distinct and not just look like a Chaplain mini. And also the haft of the axe is like sort of real traditional wood. It looks like that's a bit ramshackle and not the original shaft that the axe would have had. And I sort of get that. Like, that is also the vibe of Renegades. They are struggling. They don't have support in the same way that they have always traditionally, a Space Marine chapter would have it. They can't just go to the local Forge World and get a new axe. They are having to make do and mend, as they say. So this model's teasing that for sure. There are elements of that sort of ramshackle scavenging nature in these models, and that's the kind of story that I do like that they're telling here. And lastly, for the Marines, we've got Garlon Soul Eater, who is a sorcerer. Now, he's probably the most chaosified one of the lot, so I think this is maybe the model I like the least. Got a very traditional Chaos backpack, lots of sort of bone embellishments on it. Very Thousand Suns-esque in terms of the helmet and the robes. There's something that's not quite as... It's not winning me over in quite the same way as the other minis are. And maybe that's just because it's a sorcerer or it's, nodding to the Thousand Suns. The combination of the Red Corsair's fist also appearing on the Chaos Star, kind of clever. I'm not sure I like it though. I don't know. I think there's just something slightly off with this mini that I can't quite tell. Maybe it's because half of him looks like he's in power armor and the other half is a robe for his lower half. And that's like a real juxtaposition. But I mean, you get that with a lot of sort of sorcerer Marine minis. Yeah, overall it's okay. It's just not the best. Next up, we've got the first of the non-Space Marine miniatures, which is Captain Sargota, who is, I assume, the ship captain of whatever ship the Red Corsairs actually have. Does it actually say it down here? Oh, just shipmaster of a Red Corsairs fleet. Doesn't give a particular name to the ship. But in the live stream, they talked about how this sort of podium that she's on, she sort of floats in terms of boarding actions, and all the mechanendrites connects to the ship to take over the enemy ship, which is really cool. She's got some little sort of bird skulls embellishments on her. She's got a peg leg, which is suitably piratical. Yeah, it's great to see human elements in Space Marine forces. They did that with Titus. I have for a very long time been running the hashtag on Instagram, Codex Surf, which is basically trying to force as many humans into my Minotaur's army as possible. And often they're not actual playing pieces. Well, I just use them as tokens to represent wounds or maybe something else. But for the most part, they're meant to be wound tokens for the characters or for the unit. But it gives you that real John Blanche-esque style vibe that Space Marines just aren't there fighting on their own. They're also fighting alongside guys in robes, tech priests, the Adeptus, the priesthood, basically. Like, there's all these other surrounding logistical human forces allowing the Space Marines to do their job as well. And visually, I think that's much more fantastic. So this is a really cool, bold choice. And I'm here for it, basically. It's a cool model. And then last up, we've got two aliens. So we've got Tarlean, who is the bounty hunter. And then she's also got a dog with her as well. These are two really cool and interesting minis. And I remember when they were previewing these and they were just silhouettes, due to the arm that she's got here, a lot of people suspected that maybe it was like a Votan robot, like one of the jackals, but it wasn't. It was something completely different. And this is such like a mad and interesting design. It's great when 40k gets expanded to show these Xenos elements. And it's like, if you were to give us an entire unit of this that was not aligned to anyone and was effectively like in Age of Sigmar, like a Regiments of Renown, which is effectively a unit that most factions could just take as a one-off. This is a fantastic idea. This is what I've always said about Tau and, you know, Tau's, all these extra aliens that the Tau have like subsumed. It's a great way to explore these other alien races without having to do an entire new faction. And this is like a nice little addition. It's a great little tease and a way of expanding stuff out, which I love. So she's got like a kind of power fist type thing, which apparently she lost her normal arm when trying to tame the actual dog that she has here, which is called, I believe, let's just have a quick look, Bargessi, which is a vicious little dog. And apparently they can get much worse by the sounds of it. But this is a much smaller version than the sort of larger, more vicious versions than they can grow up to become. The slightly weird human raccoon-esque hands are great. And then the sort of the quadruple eyes, really unnerving, but in a great way. I mean, these models are all fantastically painted as well. But there's just so much interesting kind of character to them and sort of storytelling. The addition of aliens in Red Corsairs is I think, new from as far as I'm aware. I mean, I'm probably not that up to date in terms of what they've been up to post the Badab War. So, yeah, this is really interesting. It's a great direction that they've done for this unit. So if we just look back at the unit overall, I am super stoked about these. They're all pretty phenomenal minis. Yeah, the Sorcerer, maybe not as keen on, but it is pretty good overall. And I'm generally really tempted to get them. I think they'd be a phenomenal small force to get alongside the other miniatures that they've previewed for Red Corsairs. So let's get on with those. The Lord of the Maelstrom's Battle Force box containing some old miniatures with upgrade sprues and also some brand new miniatures. There's the Reeve Captain, which you can just about see here at the bottom. Then we've got the Red Corsair Raiders, which is a phenomenal new unit, which we'll look at in more detail shortly. We've got some Traitor Guardsmen, 10 of them at the back, Chaos Legionnaires, and 5 standard Chaos Space Marines in Terminator armor. And they've all got upgrade sprues, basically. So they're the old kits with new bits added on. So let's take a closer look at probably my most favorite piece of the Red Corsairs. I mean, Huron's still up there, but these are phenomenal because these are quintessentially how I see Chaos Space Marines, especially the Renegade Marines, rather than the sort of standard traitor Chaos Space Marines. Like, they're very unchaosified. They have very few spiky bits. They are basically a mixture of hobcobbled old armor. So in the guys that we first see, we've got some very punk hairdos, which is quite cool. There is the kind of quintessential chaos style backpack where the exhaust vents are like protruding out to the sides further. So they're still there. There's a lot of sort of fabric tabards and fur embellishments going on, but the actual marks of armor is much more closer to like 4, 5, I would say, a bit of 6 in some areas than some of the others. So yeah, they look really cool. Obviously, they've still got the effectively mini wrestling belts. They're not quite as egregious as Hurons or Abaddons, for example, but they've got that sort of nod to the direction of where they will go. What looks like the squad leader, the sergeant, he's got a power sword and a hand flamer. Then there's another guy with a chainsword and a bolt pistol. Next up, we've got what's been described as a guy looking like he's about to grab a lightsaber, but it's a telescopic sight for his rifle, although he actually looks like he's got a chainsword and a bolt pistol. Chainswords and bolt pistols seem to be the de facto. We do actually see a Mark 7 helmet, which is really good. I would like to see them lean more into the Mark 7 stuff, because I think I'm pretty sure the majority of the Space Marines around that time would have, and I say at that time, the Badab War have a lot of Mark 7 stuff. Although Badab War did have an awful lot of different armor marks, because that was when Forge World first actually introduced the concept of different marks of armor, and actually produced them in terms of, I think it was, 2 to 5 basically is what we. No, I guess it would have been 2 to 6. I'm pretty sure they did them all, and that was very much a precursor to the Horus Heresy ones. I could be completely wrong, but I'm pretty sure they did a lot of those in resin early days. So those guys are really cool. One of them's got very in sort of Primaris, the sniper squad, where you've got a cloak covering the backpack. Then we've got 2 more guys, one with a melter gun and a sort of half helm, just showing, like, covering the rebreather that's a much more of a Legionnaire style helmet, because it looks a bit more chaosified. And that's, I think, Mark III backpacks we've got here. And then the other guy's got a chain axe and bolt pistol. So quite assault heavy. Apparently these have got 3 wounds each, so they're quite elite. I presume this is the same guy that we saw at the very beginning, because he looks very champion or squad leader-esque as well. And he's also got the bolt pistol and sword. Let's quickly skip back. Yeah, that's the same pose. So that's clearly, you're getting 5 models, but they are multi-pose. So you'll get 2 lots of 5 with variant build options, because that's clearly the same guy with a helmet with a plume rather than the other guy having a bare head. He looks really cool, and I absolutely love this guy with the power fist. He looks phenomenal as well. So it's interesting that I assume he's not the sergeant, and that actually you're just going to get a guy with a power fist in the squad. Now, his head is very interesting, because it is ultimately what probably people want Huron to have. Half of it's been blown away. He's a bit half Arnold Schwarzenegger, half Terminator, in that classic generic Space Marine, just stoic face, nondescript, no hair, bald. It's sort of what I imagine most people want Huron to be. And it's great that it comes in this kit. So if you did want to do a head swap, it's super easy. You could swap this head out, and there'll be plenty in the Raiders kit for you to just stick another helmeted head on. So that's a great option to see. And I just love that there's all these flat panels on the armor. There's a bit of trim here and there, but there's lots of space either for decals or just to make painting easy. A lot of the other kits a lot of kits nowadays are so complicated with detail, it makes painting a real nightmare. And, some of these, like the guy on the left, where you've got loads of fur cloak and loads of gubbins around his waist and groin area, like, there seems to be a lot of elder weaponry in terms of, there's like a dagger here, and then there's like a symbol and jewels hanging off. And that is also what Huron's got on him as well. So I'm not entirely sure the link between the Red Corsairs and Eldari, other than the fact that I guess they're just raiders and we'll probably come across them and just have beef with them. But beyond that, I'm not quite sure what the link would be in this regard. So it'd be interesting to see from a lore perspective why they've added on these little nods here and there. But maybe it's to potentially distinguish them from standard Chaos Marines. But these guys look great. Then we've got the last 2. One guy is chucking a smoke grenade by the looks of it, and he's actually got a bolt rifle, old school style. Awesome sort of black band makeup going across his face. And then the last guy's got a Mark 6 beaky helmet and a bolt gun as well. So it feels like you're going to have a mix of a couple of bolt guns. I guess if these are duplicated, you're going to have maybe 4. So let's have a quick look up here if we can see. There's definitely 1, 2, melter gun. Yeah, maybe. It kind of looks like in a squad of 10, you're getting 2 bolt guns, a melter gun, and then a combination of pistols and close combat weapons, which is an odd mix for a squad. it will make it a pain to play just because you're rolling lots of different dice and doing different things. But I love the sort of versatility that this is implying, that they are, a raiding force. They've got lots of different weapons. So I think visually this feels very on brand for the Red Corsairs. So I think that's very cool. So overall, the Raiders, like 10 out of 10 in my mind, maybe 9 out of 10. These are really strong unit. This is what I want all Red Corsairs to look like, and it's a bit of a shame in a way that these are a special, unique unit that are very elite. So you can't make an entire army of them. You're going to have to fall back on those standard Chaos Legionnaires with their upgrade sprues. And before we get into them, let's look at the Reeve Captain. So he's quite cool. Maybe he's not as cool as Huron and his cohort, and he's not quite cool as the Raiders. So he's not bad. I'm certainly drawn more to the guy with the helmet on and the mace, and he seems to be holding something in his hand, versus the guy with the plasma pistol and power sword. Although I do like the hooked sword. That's very practical. He's also got a eye patch, so he's quite, pirate themed. So he looks cool, but I think the pose with the helmet on does look better, and that kind of sort of little trophy rack poking out of his backpack also just gives him a bit more stature, I think. Then we've got probably the weakest part of the box, at least, is the Chaos Legionnaires with the upgrade sprue to make them look like Red Corsairs. Now, when they did this with the Night Lords, it looked phenomenal, and it was probably the best looking Chaos Legionnaire sort of generic warriors that we've ever seen. They looked phenomenal, and they're using the same base kit as this one. Yeah, it just doesn't look as cool. And I don't know if it's because the Night Lords had a better upgrade sprue, or just their helmets are so iconic and the paint scheme sort of carries it along. To me, these are the least Red Corsairs things in the box. They look too chaosified for my personal taste. This isn't what I would want. I would want them to look more like Mark 7 and older Space Marines with a few chaos embellishments on them from time to time. But basically, from what I can gather, it's the shoulder pads, the heads, a lot more of the bare heads, and I think a couple of the weapon choices in terms of the style of the chainsword. And we can look at the actual upgrade sprue separately. So yeah, they're kind of okay, but it's not what I want. And I think what I would do if I was to do a Red Corsairs army, which I am really tempted to do, it would be to try and source some Horus Heresy miniatures for the older marks of armor and load them out in the same way as the Chaos Legionnaires, because you've got the restriction of WYSIWYG and trying to make them play like Chaos Legionnaires, even if stylistically they look a bit more like the Raiders. So I think that'd be the way to lean into it. Sadly, there's no Mark 7 Space Marines in like the current scale, with the exception of some of the Hero Rangers. So you could lean into that slightly if you had access to them. I think Mark 7 will come at some point, especially now the story is focusing on the scouring in terms of the Black Library books. I wouldn't be surprised if they do Mark 7 down the line, and then it would be a perfect opportunity to do Red Corsairs then. But using some of these isn't the end of the world. Maybe taking some of these and removing some of the spiky bits and some of the trim details, pairing some of the more chaosified elements. I think also swapping out some of the backpacks. I don't mind these chaos backpacks from time to time, but a whole unit of them just looks too much. I think they need to go back to some of the other things. Yeah, I would be potentially inclined, at the very least, to swap out some of the backpacks for some older marks, which I think would be quite easy to do. Then we got the Terminators. These kind of look all right. The new Terminator kit as Chaos Minis was pretty phenomenal. It just looked like a slightly better version than the original models that they were replacing. What I would do here is take the helmets and swap those out for ones without the tusks. Just go to the standard, current range of Primaris Terminator helmets and use those and see how compatible they are. just to have a bit more of a classic helmet look. Probably get rid of a trophy racks on most of them, maybe with the exception of the squad leader. The lightning claws I really like on here being fingers. That's very cool. Yeah, the use of the fur pelts and the tabards, which are in the base kit, not the upgrade, because for these it is just a shoulder pad. That's all you get. It does work well and looks very similar to the Raiders, so that's not too bad. Yeah, I'd just be inclined. I'd almost be tempted to do the Primaris kits and do sort of 50-50 mix them in some way, but I think this would be the easiest way, is just doing this. And yeah, just minimizing some of those chaotic elements. Definitely get rid of that sword if I was going for the sword. I'm not a fan of that. Okay. I feel like I've cost my judgment on Terminators. Let's look at Traitor Guard. Traitor Guard is cool. I've always said it. Traitor Guard, being renegade militia, deserve their own codex. They should be in their own army in their own right. So this is the path of least resistance for Games Workshop, giving us an upgrade sprue, and I will talk about this in a bit more detail when we look at the upgrade sprue. It's a little bit minimum effort from them, which is a shame, but for Traitor Guard, specifically for the Red Corsairs, isn't too bad as a concept. From what I gather, it's mostly a paint scheme. But Traitor Guard's really cool. I'd love to see them flesh out the Guardsmen with more models, like a command squad, heavy weapons squad, all the classic stuff. But also in the Forge World range, they did the Ogryns, or mutated Ogryns, I think they were, the Enforcers, which had like these sort of Beast Pack Masters and things like that. So there's a lot more they could do with Traitor Guardsmen. So it's massively underrepresented in 40k from what they once were and what could be. So yeah, let's look at the upgrade pack, which also comes with some transfers, which allow you to do some vehicles. So yeah, we got 5 heads. I mean, there's nothing that really screams Red Corsair in terms of the head start, other than that they clearly have cool haircuts when they're not bald. And a lot of the work is actually the paint scheme with the little stripes going across the eyes, which you could really do with any Space Marine head. Like, you could use Space Marine heads rather than the Chaos ones. And maybe that's probably a good route to go if you did want to like convert some minis up. Just use Space Marines for the most part. You've then got 10 of the Red Corsairs shoulder pads, and then you got 5 of the Terminators shoulder pads, which have the embellished, embossed detail of the fist on it for, the chapter marking. That's cool. I do sometimes like just using transfers over having to hand paint these. So, it's not the end of the world just having a plain shoulder pad. Then basically you've got 2 types of chain swords, which there's one that's like with a round tip that goes all over. That one's quite iconic, and I think you see a lot more in Space Wolves. I quite like that one. The other one, where it's got an extra sort of sharp bolt attached to the end, that's a bit more like a sort of spike, and less keen on that one. And then you've got some sort of generic trophy racks, again, with Elder stuff. So you've got a Eldari or Drakari head, you've got some hands, you've got some gems that look very Eldari, you've got a nondescript skull, which could be anything, and what looks like a book. So they're kind of cool, having like they're sort of Bandalore style with bullets attached to them, that sort of nice little embellishment details that you can do. And my point I sort of teased out that I want to explain a bit more in detail here is it's a bit low effort in comparison to what you get with Space Wolves, Blood Angels, Dark Angels. These are all sub-factions of Space Marines. They have entire ranges to themselves where they use some generic Space Marine minis, but they've got characters, they've got squads, loads of unique squads, upgrade sprues, all sorts. And you have seen that with the big chaos gods like Thousand Suns, Death Guard, Old Eaters, and this is a bit of a halfway house. I think this is them teasing the idea of these extra, slightly less popular chaos factions, like the Night Lords getting just an upgrade sprue in Kill Team. This is just getting an upgrade sprue with a couple of extra, character-esque units and like one elite unit thrown in. it's slightly less than what World Eater's got, because World Eater's got Angron and like a handful of unique units and cultist units. But that was really minuscule. This is slightly less than that. I mean, I really do hope this is the first of a first wave, and maybe down the line in a year or two, we'll get another wave of Red Corsair minis and they can really flesh this line out, because I would like to see a bit more of a distinction between Chaos Marines and Renegade Marines, and there being a bit more of a distinction. I think in the lore that they have used some demon or like kind of possessed cultists and things like that. I can't exactly remember, but I like the fact that the Marines themselves haven't fallen to chaos and been corrupted, and they're not like demon possessed, or they're not brimming with mutations. The chaos elements are much more toned down, and that's the thing I like about chaos in a lot of the heresy range, is that they're just, for the most part, just slightly different looking Marines, and that is what I like about them here. I mean, these are basically, in summary, Chaos Marines for people who don't like Chaos Marine aesthetic, and that's why I love them. So yes, you could argue it's a poor showing for Red Corsairs, that they're basically getting, I guess, 3 units. One's a character unit, one's an elite unit, plus an upgrade sprue. That's not particularly great, but I assume, come next edition, they are just going to be rolled into the main core Chaos book. They're going to go alongside because that book is predominantly Chaos Undivided, much like the Black Legion. The Red Corsairs are like a slightly smaller, cooler kid version of the Black Legion. So I can imagine them being there rather than being in their own book. I would love them to be justifiably in their own book for sure, but they need more models. And I hopefully, if this sells well, I could see that happening down the line, maybe. So yeah, it'd be exciting to see where this goes. So next up is the Eldar Corsairs, which were a small subfaction of Eldari from a while ago that hasn't really been represented properly in the rules. Most recently, we got a Kill Team addition to them, which was a unit of just Corsairs. They then joined the mainline Eldari faction in a similar way to how Harlequins are sort of just rolled into the main faction now, not their own distinct separate thing. Back in the day, Corsairs used to be fleshed out by Forge World, and they had their own model range that you could supplement with your main Eldari army. So they had characters in unique units. So we're finally seeing this in the mainline 40k world with Games Workshop. This is with the Eldritch Raiders Battle Force, which is going to be a box similar to the Red Corsair one, which I think was Lords of the Maelstrom. So we've got a new vehicle. We've got some new sort of jump units, the Kill Team unit that we've already seen before, and then Prince Uriel, although if you're Adam Troke, you're calling him Iriel, which I assume is the correct pronunciation because people at Games Workshop would know that. However, he's Uriel in my book, and that is where we're going to lie forevermore. So yeah, it talks about the Battle Force box contains Corsair Sky Reavers, which I think are these guys, the Mystical Void Dreamer, which is this character hiding up in that corner. Then we got 10 Corsair Void Scarred, which is the generic one, and also the brand new Viper kit, which is a dual kit. So this isn't actually the Viper, but you can build it as a Viper, which is a vehicle, which is exciting. Much like Corsairs, these are models that I've wanted to own for a very long time, in terms of I love the idea of doing Corsairs is in Eldari Corsairs. If I was to ever do an Eldar army, it would have been Corsairs, and that was at a time when I think you could still just about get some of those Forge World minis, and I do remember eyeing them up a long time ago. So there's a small part of my heart which does really want to have these models. Not as much as the Red Corsairs, though. That is where the vibe I'm feeling at the moment is I'm leaning towards them. So yeah, Prince Uriel as a model, this is a really phenomenal sculpt. He's got a back banner. He's got a sort of asymmetrical design with one large shoulder pad. He's got a bear head with a top knot and sort of like a metal Phantom of the Opera style face mask going on, which I'm not actually sure about what that is. But it kind of looks cool. He's carrying a spear. I really love the leg detail where on the kneecap you've got like a little head. Really reminds me of, I think it was Cities of Sigmar, because it was basically dark elf like sea captain for dark elves, I believe, has a very similar get-up, which is very cool. And I like those little elements. He's also got what sort of looks like a sort of weird shield arm buckler on his left arm, and that giant pauldron shoulder pad looks very cool. Really nice mini. If we scroll down slightly, we can see some extra views of it. So I actually really like the helmeted version. It's giving me Avatar of Cain vibes slightly, or one of the Yanari guys, the Vizark, I think it is, has similar vibe to him. And that's a cool mini as well. That's really phenomenal because it's not quite classic Eldari. It's a slightly different spin on it, and I think that's what I like about the Corsairs as well. If we just have a look at the old original model, which I think was originally metal and then done in fine cast, you can see a lot of the similarities. I think he's actually stood on a bit of a Tyranid biform chimney there. Like there's some chitinous plates that he's on, because I think he has been famous for fighting Tyranids in the past. So there, again, he's got his Phantom of the Opera mask on, so that is clearly a part of him. The twin back panners and the spear. So, I mean, that is a cool pose and a cool miniature as well. And they've just done a very similar thing where they've taken all of those elements and just given him a kind of more dynamic pose. But a lot of it is very similar. So that is cool to see. Moving on, we've got the Sky Reavers. So they are a jump pack elite shock troops armed with Corsair blades and multiple special weapons. So these are really interesting, and I'll show you what they also remind me of. So yeah, they've got the almost like bug style wings protruding out their backs. One of them's got like a sort of a skyhook, a chainsword, pistols and blades. Some of the others have got blasters. It's that classic problem with jump pack units where they've moved away from flight stands, so instead we've just got them on rock, always in a landing pose, and it gets a bit old quite quickly. And the fact that they're basically a foot off the ground doesn't really make them feel like they're flying in the air, which is always a bit of a downside. I would much rather they be like another inch or two off the ground, a bit more in the air, even if that means having a much larger piece of ruin or rock protruding from the ground, like a column or something. That's how I've always kitbashed my jump pack models to look like, custom making a base and pinning them. So if I was to ever have these, not that I will, I don't think, that is what I would do to them, just because that bit I think is slightly frustrating. There's some female heads. Yeah, I mean, some of the poses aren't wowing me, to be polite. And some of the heads are quite cool. Yeah, some of the poses are a little bit more dynamic. But again, yeah, I guess there's not what you can do with, I assume, 10 different models, although I assume it's going to be 5 duplicated with some alternate swaps. Their cooling concept, I don't think the implementation is completely nailing it. However, they basically are an evolution of the old Forge Rod minis, which I'll bring up here. These were the Forge Rod Corsairs, and you can see here that kind of bug wing jump pack protruding from the back. These guys, much larger rifles, and then there's like a heavy variant of them as well, which you can see here with really big heavy weapons. But again, these two protruding bug wings from the back forming a form of jump pack. Now, these really remind me, going back to Rogue Trader, there's a fantastic bit of artwork which we can load up. And you can see these 3 or 4 Eldari bugs in the air, and that is clearly where the original inspiration came from. So it was great to see a really old reference from Rogue Trader being picked up by Forge World and used there, and then that being again reused in the new models. So it's great to see this evolution from these kind of slightly mad concepts all the way back in Rogue Trader. And I don't believe these ones here from Rogue Trader ever really had models like that. I don't think the initial Elder models had these kind of bug wings at all until the Forge World ones came out. I could be wrong. Again, it's a thing that maybe Dan would know, but Dan is sadly no longer with us. Not like that, but he's just not on the podcast. So it's great to see that kind of evolutionary narrative going through the model line. These new Corsairs being very similar all the way back to that Rogue Trader mini. So that's a nice little touch. We've then got the Karseth, which is a Void Dreamer who is a form of Psyker. Really sort of big bug helmets. I tell you, bugs is maybe a bit theme form. Looks quite quintessentially Eldari, though. I'm sure you could just proxy this if you wanted it to be a regular sort of Psyker mini for Elder. So it's a cool mini. I like it. Really kind of dynamic pose with the way the robe is going up into the air. Stuff is nicely detailed. Overall, not really much else to say. It's a bit hard to tell what's going on with the left hand. I think it's just stretched out, but then there's all these ribbon bits taking out the side, which is sort of obscuring it from a silhouette point of view from that image. So getting to see a 360 of this would be really good, I reckon. And then last up, we've got the Viper and the Starfang. So here is the Viper version. So this is a dual kit. This is, from what I can recall, the first time we've had a classic vehicle. I know I misspeak. The Sentinel was a more recent one where we've had a classic redo of a really old sculpt. Because for the most part, while all through 8th edition onwards, we've had a slow rolling out of new models for every single faction. It's mostly been focused around the infantry and not vehicles, because I think the vehicles, for the most part, age quite well because you don't really see much in the way of crew on them, and they're just really nicely designed. The Sentinel was very diddy, and that has been completely upscaled. The Viper looked pretty good, but it had an open back where you could see the crew, and I think that was a thing that particularly dated this vehicle over some of the others. So I can see why it found an excuse to update that kit, and I'm sure down the line we will see things like the Grab Falcon and the other vehicles, even things like the Neiman Russ, the Rhino, the Land Raider, all get redone in due course, and maybe the next edition is where we will start to see that rolled out. Yeah, so if you look, you can see a really cool side view of the Viper kit where you can see that enclosed back cockpit. And then we also have, I think it's here, an image of the very original one, which is going on to 29 years, I believe. The Adam and Eddie was saying it was over 30 years, but I have a double check on the wiki, and it seems to be 29 years because it came out in 97. So we're 1 year shy of 30 years. But yeah, it's a long old kit. As you can see, there's this sort of the crew member with the gun at the back. It's sort of straddling a saddle type device. So that kind of open top feature, yeah, looks a little bit silly in modern day comparison. So streamlining it to look like more modern vehicles and being more of like an enclosed turret actually does it really good. And it does tie in with the other vehicles that you have. Yeah, so it really does tie in visually with the Graf Falcon, which I've just got up on the screen for those watching along. You can see that sort of bulbous turret, very similar to how they've done the new Viper. So that's a really nice touch, sort of tying it in more with the existing range. And they talk about how they made the jet engines at the back tie in with the existing vehicles as well, because obviously something that's designed 29, there's going to be some evolution from that kit to some of the later plastic kits like the Falcon the Wave Serpent, and they're just sort of bringing these back in. Now, it does seem to have a very sort of spindly connection point between the two halves. That would be my only concern from a modeling point of view. Sounds like it might have a bit of wiggle room for pivoting around, so it can actually spin around, because I assume that's how it's meant to actually operate if it was in the real world. But yeah, it does give it a very fragile look to it, which is what Eldar should really be all about. And then we've got the Starfang, which is, I think, the Corsair specific build. It'll be interesting to see in the rules if that's how it goes, but it sounds like with the Corsairs, they'll be joining the regular Eldari army anyway, but they do have some elements of Drakari weapons on them as well, because they are sort of crossing over across the factions. And it feels like it's got a bit more of an enclosed cockpit, and maybe it's a bit more. I don't think of the name. It's not the Hurricane, but there is a version of the Hurricane that actually has guns pointing backwards. And it feels like that is elements of what that's being inspired to. So it's got a rear mounted cockpit with the guns facing backwards rather than forwards on the Viper. And then the cockpit is partially open, where the Viper is, I believe, fully enclosed, but with some slightly different detail. Yeah, similar wing design. The whole front section is the same. It's just that sort of cockpit design. I do actually wonder if it's the exact same piece that it's just literally rotated around, or if it's, for the most part, it's the same, but then there's a couple of extra elements on it just to give it a slightly different design. So that's really cool to see as well, like an expansion of the Eldari range with kits, and while the medium of a dual kit is always quite good, even if it is just a cost-saving exercise for Games Workshop, if you were to be really cynical about it, because that's why they do them. Then we've got the classic Corsairs, great kits filled with character, but it's a kit that we've seen before, so I don't really need to talk about that too much. But yeah, they look cool. And as a force, overall, is really nice. And if we just go back to that Battle Force box, you get a decent amount of models. It's not one that you'd probably want to buy multiple times. I mean, you could, but you'll be stuck with Uriel a couple of times, but then I'm sure you could easily sell him on. And then obviously you've got that psychic model as well, which you probably only want one of as well. But essentially it's a cheap way of buying a bunch of Corsairs. And again, we had the kill team initially, and that's all we've really had for Corsairs. So it's great to see them be expanded out, similar to the Red Corsairs. I would love these to be their own dedicated faction, to have more units that are unique to just them and more vehicles that are unique to just them. And maybe we will get down that route one day. I do feel like if they are going to do that, they're going to have to give a bit more love to the Harlequins and make them their own faction once more. Maybe that'll be something we see in the next edition. Who knows? But overall, yeah, these are it's a solid outing for both the Red Corsairs and the Eldari Corsairs. So next up, we've got the campaign book, The Maelstrom Lair of the Tyrant. Much like 500 Worlds, it's in a slipcase featuring full components. The thing that actually puzzles me with this is actually when they were talking about 500 Worlds, I was assuming, much like Arcs of Omen was called Arcs of Omen, and it was a series of books all about the Arcs of Omen. I was expecting all of these books for the end of 10th edition to all be 500 Worlds, something. The first one was 500 Worlds Titus. I was expecting this one to be, let's say, 500 Worlds Lair of a Tyrant, but it's not. It feels like these are completely separate engagements around the galaxy. They're not actually tied together in any way, which will be really interesting to see the future of what these other books will be, depending on how many we see. I think Arcs of Omen was 6 in the end. It might have been 5. And I think one of the downsides of Arcs of Omen is it felt like a real mishmash of different stories based on what models they wanted to release, and it was a little bit difficult to try and tie them all together. You had one that was all about orcs and Tau, and that one really felt completely out of place in comparison to the rest of the story. I guess you could argue Angron and the lion, that sort of showdown made complete sense, but some other elements were a little bit on the weak side, although overall I think the story was pretty good. So yeah, this one isn't doing this at all. This is not 500 worlds. It's not continuation of 500 worlds. Maybe one of the other books will go back to 500 worlds, and what we'll see is 500 worlds Titus is a part 1, and then there'll be a 500 worlds something else, and that will be the part 2 to that campaign, which does have some previous, pre-established history with Games Workshop doing that. I think back in 7th edition you had a lot of campaign books that were done as tours. So there was like a first book and a second book, and you could buy them, I think, in a slipcase to combine them together. There was, I wouldn't say it was called Shield of Baal, but there was definitely all Leviathan, and it was basically Tyranids versus Blood Angels with a bit of Necrons in there. There was Space Wolves and Thousand Suns, and then there was some generic Chaos ones, and I think also Orcs and Space Wolves. Dan would know, but Dan is not here to help me out, so I'm having to fluff this. Anyway, the Maelstrom, Lord of a Tyrant, completely different setting, kind of makes things a lot easier than trying to tie it in with 500 worlds. This one is both the Red Corsairs and the Eldritch Raiders, I think they're called, which is basically the Corsairs in terms of Eldari Corsairs. Comes with 3 books. You've got the generic Lair of a Tyrant, which I presume is going to be the lore book. You've got the Raid and Ruin is the campaign book. Then you've got Crucible of Champion, which is specifically how to create your own custom characters as part of a campaign. And then you've got Lair of the Tyrant Detachments, which I think is going to be the Corsairs rules and data sheets. Let's have a quick look and see what it says. So there's an extensive background lore book covering the most notorious figures, Huron and Prince Uriel, about Orc freebooters, Chaos War bands hidden within the Maelstrom. The Raid and Ruin book contains rules for the new campaign. Okay, so that's the campaign book. And you have notoriety points to earn titles to prove themselves as being the best captive. You get 12 missions with options for 3 and 4 player engagements. 3 and 4 player missions, phenomenal, great addition to see. And there hasn't been any that I can think of so far in 10th edition, other than maybe the odd, like maybe in the Crusade rules, but I can't think of any off the top of my head. Yeah, Raid and Ruin, that is the campaign book. Crucible of Champions, they talk about here just briefly, make amazing characters of your own creation. So they talk about a rogue trader with 2 Inferno pistols, a Ravenwing librarian on a bike, Astra Militarum officer in a Sentinel, and, a psychic Tyranid artillery beast in the grot with big ideas. So I think they did similar things in 8th edition. It's been a while since they've done these kind of cool concepts of just building your own characters, which is great, especially when it's tied in with a campaign. So it's not impacting match play tournaments in any way. But for those that want just to have fun games, they can totally do it. And I imagine you could probably use the Crucible of Champions book without actually doing a campaign. If you want to just do some standalone games with your mates, just use these rules as a bolt-on. And I think that is the way to go. Now, you could say that we're probably going to get these rules for 4 or 5 months tops before a new edition comes out. And then will these rules still be compatible? Possibly not, which will be a real shame. And that's something to bear in mind with any of these books, is that there is potentially a limited lifespan on the rules. Potentially the campaigns themselves will still be valid because missions are relatively easy to translate over from one edition to the next, because for the most part, the way you score a mission is very mission specific and not edition specific. So there's, and you get your lore books as well. So yes, two of these books, the Detachments and the Crucible of Champions, might not be at all compatible with the new edition, which will be a shame if that's the case, but that is something to be aware of when buying them. Raid and Ruin, being the campaign book, and the generic Lair of a Tyrant, which will be the lore, will still be valid. So 2 out of 4. Is that value for money? That is for you to decide. I've been burnt quite a few times in those regards, but I will be picking this up because I particularly want it for the lore. It'll be cool to see what the rules are to give me some guidance on if I do create a Red Corsairs army, but I will have to go into building a Red Corsairs army knowing that by the time I've even built anything, it'll probably be the next edition, because it takes me that long to do stuff. So that is something to worth bearing in mind. Then we've also got some Maelstrom battalions, which is featuring some extra Xenos races. So these are effectively combat patrol boxes. You've got the Drakari coming in with some witches, Reaver jet bikes, some Hellions, and 2 Venoms. And that's not Lilith. Is it? No. It's just, succubus. That's it. Just looks a bit like him. Yeah, I mean, I'm not really going to say anything about these. And then you've got the Votan with the Mimnir strategist, which, I couldn't name for the life of me on the end of the year quiz, which we put out at the beginning of the month. You get the Herkin pioneers. Yeah. And, the Steeljacks. Interesting mix of robots and the bikes. The bikes are not my favorite. So again, if they had not included those, but is there any more robots they could have done? I guess it would have been just a regular unit because they include them as well. Yeah. I think if I could have lent more into just robots, this would have been visually more interesting. But, I think they're just trying to do a mixed bag of stuff. So, yeah, those 2 are available. I don't care about them personally. If you are a collector of those 2, maybe you would be. And I guess you could, in a way, theme it to the campaign, but I wouldn't be too hung up on it personally. So now we're on to the last of the dedicated 40K section of the reveal show, and this preview, this little tease is saying it's for the Eye of Terror, and it's clearly the Iron Warriors. Now, it's probably worth noting that just before the reveal show came out, there was an presumed leaked image of Perturabo as this demon lord, but I think it's been roundly denounced as AI. I think at the very least the photo composition is AI, just because it's got that general look. The model itself does look pretty convincing. Does it look great? Probably not, personally, as what a demon Primarch could be. Would Games Workshop do a better design? Yes. Does it look like quite a good sculpt, especially if it was AI? Yeah, it's okay. There are some telltale signs that make me think it's not legit. One, you can't see a base at all, and even on most of Games Workshop artwork, the base is still quite visible on it. 2, you've got a very tiny hammer. It just feels like if he was to have a hammer, it would be a lot bigger. And then also you've got, the little arrows that appear on the trim. So on one side, it's definitely an arrow, but then on the other leg, it's just kind of a straight line that doesn't really go anywhere. And then likewise, those sorts of arrow details elsewhere on the body are just sort of a bit all over the place. But the elements of these big exhausts on the back, this big claw, this big hammer, are those bits correct? Could someone have maybe seen the image, ran it through an AI, and this is what they got? So it's not a complete copy, but it's a fake in some way. Yeah, I mean, maybe. And then here we've got the actual Games Workshop reveals. And it makes me wonder if this was always meant to be part of the reveal show, or if this is a deliberate reaction to that Perturabo presumed leak that is, I think most people would say, is AI image. And Games Workshop is very good at reacting to stuff out there. So it does make me wonder if this was done purely because of that leak. It might just be a coincidence. It might be someone generated that image of a fake Perturabo because the general rumor consensus is that there's some Iron Warrior stuff coming out down the line. So that person is sort of playing into the rumors that are swirling around at the moment. So yeah, the first image is clearly like some kind of servo arm with a kind of a wrench claw with hazard stripes. The second image is clearly another kind of sort of servo arm weapon. Looks like it's going to be a flamer of some kind. And these both look like they're shoulder mounted. So could be on a Perturabo, could be on a demon engine of some kind or demon prince. I mean, who honestly knows? There is a hammer that looks much bigger and much more Games Workshop. So maybe these are images of Perturabo. If it was, it just feels a bit odd that Perturabo wouldn't have been the Christmas Day reveal. Huron is big, but a Primarch is bigger. Maybe they've not done it because that's what they've been doing for the last few years and they wanted to mix things up a little bit. I don't know. And then for the last few bits is we've got an Iron Warriors shoulder pad, and then we've got these large exhausts, which do make me wonder if this is a Chaos Demon engine of some kind, like a Hellbrute. Let me go and do some resets quickly, and then we can come back to that one. There's a giant claw, which does feel like, if you look at the background detail, does feel like it's on the Toll Grinder. Again, another kind of claw arm. Is it the same one and it's just open? No, it does look slightly differently. This looks like a bit more organic, so this has more of a Hellbrute vibe to me. And then there's a foot. This looks quite small, so this could be just like an Iron Hands Captain, potentially Perturabo, but I sort of doubt that one. And then we're back to the beginning. They do tease that this is specifically which miniatures do these belong to, so it's not all one miniature. I think there's definitely, at the very least, an Iron Warriors captain or leader model of some kind. Could be a named character that's just not Perturabo. Could be one of these is Perturabo. And then I think some of them are a bunch of demon engines. So if we look at the Mauler Fiend and Forge Fiend designs, you can see that they do have these kind of fists for mechadendrites, but most importantly, these kind of exhausts coming from the back that you can see here. So, and look at this lovely hazard stripe fist as well. So I could very much see some of this kind of backpack exhaust bit definitely being part of the Mauler Fiend. Then maybe one of these fists belongs to a Mauler Fiend as well. That I'm still convinced is a Soul Grinder. So quickly looking at the Hellbrute miniatures, I'm just scrolling through, and actually maybe these aren't anything to do with it. There is a fist version here, and they do have that kind of mixture of flesh and armor combined. So it's certainly a possibility, but it doesn't feel like it quite lines up in the same way that the Mauler Fiend does. But then maybe they're completely redesigning it. So maybe they're being a bit more intricate with their detail, because these claws that they've previewed are a lot more finicky and yeah. So this claw style does remind me a lot more of Mastor's style. So maybe that's just the direction they're going in, and they're not really taking many notes on the old Hellbrute, if this is at all a Hellbrute preview. Then my one last pick is there's a giant claw and what looks like some legs in the background with some hazard stripe armor. Now this is, I think it's the Defiler. So I think this is a new Defiler claw that we can see. And you can see on the old kit, they've got these like two large claws and then this big armored panel encasing it. And I think that's what we're seeing here. Claws are much more in keeping with Vastor. They've got a bit more of an organic look to it than a sort of an industrial kind of cutters that we've had previously. So I think what we're seeing is some Iron Warrior specific miniatures and then some generic Chaos miniatures painted up as Iron Warriors. And as I sort of talked about earlier with the Eldari stuff, I wouldn't be surprised if down the line we do see all the vehicles being redone. And I think I even said in the last episode with Dan, Chaos vehicles are hideously outdated. Like, they are really dated in comparison to the Space Marines or the Eldari or even like some of the Orc stuff. So yeah, to see new Hellbrutes, to see new Defilers, new Mortar Fiends and Forge Fiends would be great. So that's it for the Decay reveals. Let's move on to the Heresy stuff. That's all for this video. I hope you've enjoyed it, and hopefully I will see you soon for another video. Until then, take care.